Hi everyone and welcome, this is the Apostate Prophet. I hope you're having a great day. It certainly has been a great year so far. These days we're talking a lot about racism and slavery. People want to revolutionize society and history and take down statues of people that did bad things in the past, like own and trade slaves. At the same time, many Muslim voices join this march, which I find very ironic. Because if we want to discredit people who committed atrocities, if we want to tear down statues of people who owned and traded slaves, if we want to shame them and everybody who approves of them, then what about Muhammad? It was normal in history to own and to trade slaves. But Muhammad is not just an important person from history, he is at the center of Islam, described as an example for all humankind, the perfect human to ever walk the face of the earth. So let's look at this guy. Muhammad came from a primitive culture. His tribe were traders that valued property very much, and slaves were property. Arabs had black slaves, and in fact one early prominent Muslim is a black slave named Bilal. Muslims love to mention how Muhammad freed that black slave and gave him the honorable duty to announce the Islamic call to prayer. Somehow this is supposed to show that Muhammad was against racism and for the rights of slaves. Yet this is only an example of what someone like Muhammad would do. Preach to the weak first, like the slave Bilal, because the weak and oppressed are more likely to accept this new religion and challenge the oppressive system which enslaved Bilal. Once Bilal converts, he is used as a symbol of resistance against the system. But since Muhammad is not better than the pre-Islamic polytheists, he establishes a much larger and more oppressive system, an empire, under which thousands of Bilals suffer. That's why, although many people today are very ignorant of this, Islam established the largest, longest-lasting slave trade in history, the Arab slave trade, where most slaves were black, many of them castrated, which is why black people in Arab cultures are still casually referred to as abed or abid, slave or slaves. Throughout his life as a prophet and as the head of the state and military, Muhammad had an unknown number of slaves, and many of the slaves that he owned or that are mentioned in society are noted to be black. For example, Muhammad had a black slave named Anjasha, who was a camel driver, and in one report, Muhammad tells his slave to slow down because he's driving too fast. There is another report of a very important day in Muhammad's history, where he was angry at his wives and the entire Muslim community somehow had to be involved in that, where Muhammad's close friend Umar wants to speak to him, and he communicates to a black slave, who is the servant of Muhammad, who lets Muhammad know that Umar is here. A black slave who waits the door for Muhammad. Who cares? In one instance, we see that Muhammad was given a black slave named Midam, who was hit and killed by a random arrow while unsaddling Muhammad's camel. And the people said, "Congratulations, at least he will go to paradise." But Muhammad said, no. He stole property from the spoils of war. In a different hadith, his wife Aisha learns that the Muslims just brought back slaves from a battle, and she casually goes to Muhammad to ask him for a slave because she is in need of a maid. Just another day in the Muhammad family, the Prophet's family. There are many more reports in which Muhammad sends a slave with someone, or makes a slave help somebody wash, or goes to his tailor slave, and more. But we also have reports of him trading slaves. For example, in one very crucial report, we learn that a man, most likely an Arab, came and converted to Islam, and Muhammad accepted him. But later, it turned out that the new convert was a slave, and his master came and asked to get him back. What did Muhammad do? He bought the slave in exchange for 2 black slaves, and then freed the new Muslim slave. To hell with those 2 black slaves. So we see here that Muhammad casually uses 2 black slaves as currency in order to get a new Muslim follower, a former slave. Muhammad could have just given something else instead. Something. By the way, you can also completely see why a slave would convert to Islam, to be freed by Muhammad. Muhammad would approve of and encourage the selling of slaves. For example, in one instance, a poor man who is about to die frees his slave, and what Muhammad does next is to cancel the slave's freedom and sell him instead, then giving the money to the poor guy. This could have been a momentous opportunity to end slavery, but instead Muhammad cancels the slave's freedom and just sells him, because the poor guy's comfort is more important than the freedom of a slave. In one instance, his wife tells him that she freed a slave girl, and Muhammad says it would have been better if she had gifted the slave to her relatives. You would have gotten more reward if you had given her to one of your maternal uncles. I really don't want to let this slip. Muhammad says to his wife, who has just freed a slave girl, that she would have gotten more reward from Allah if she had gifted the slave girl to her uncles instead. I wonder how an average woman today feels about this. Be honest, Muslim women. Muhammad and his followers acquired slaves by buying them or by enslaving their enemies. We know that in many cases, one of those very explicitly described, they would kill the warriors and enslave the rest, including women and children. Just listen to this. The people came out into the streets, saying, "Muhammad and his army!" Allah's messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, vanquished them by force, and their warriors were killed. The children and women were taken as captives. This was a Jewish town that was eradicated. The women and children were enslaved. In this case, Muhammad even took one of the very important women as slave girl and later freed her by converting and marrying her. Muhammad did so more than once. No wonder in one report Aisha casually tells us that Muhammad was gone and she thought he had gone to one of his concubines for sex. The man just couldn't get enough. In fact, Muhammad allowed his warriors to violate women, like in that massacre of the Jewish tribe. A Muslim warrior said to him, "O Allah's Prophet, give me a slave girl from the captives." And Muhammad said, "Go and take any slave girl. Whichever you like, just pick and choose." Muhammad allowed his warriors to have sex with the slave girls, to violate them. Taking a slave girl means establishing a relationship in which the Muslim master can have sex with the slave, and she consents by being a slave. I guess that's what modern Muslims mean when they say Islam gave women rights, like the right to be a slave of the honorable Muslim warriors and have sex with them whenever they want. There is so much more to all of this. Like we can see that slavery was very common and that black slaves would serve for labor and entertainment in Muhammad's society, like 2 black slaves entertaining him and his little wife Aisha in a yard. But modern Muslim apologetics get so pathetic that they try to downplay the seriousness of Islamic slavery. They explain how different conditions were there. Islamic slavery was different. Slaves were treated well, but they can just shut up right away. A slave is a slave, an inferior, a tool, an object, a property that you use for help. There is no justification, no excuse to this at all. Muhammad said there is no tax on a horse or a slave belonging to a Muslim. He said, none of you should flog his wife as he flogs a slave, and then have sexual intercourse with her in the last part of the day. He used black slaves as an analogy to describe the lowest of people in society. The Quran says that a slave and a free man are not equal, and that Allah chooses some people over others. The Quran says, "We made lawful for you those your right hands possess." It allows Muslim men to own and enjoy slave girls. This is the plain and simple truth. Muhammad was a slave master and a slave trader, as he was also a warlord and owner of multiple concubines and numerous wives. He was not a perfect human, serving as an example to every human. He was a perverted part of human history, and Islam is a religion of slavery. I wouldn't be sitting here and judging Muhammad and his community by today's modern standards as slave masters and slave traders, just the way I wouldn't judge other historical figures that held slaves and invaded places throughout history, because those people just acted by the norms of their times and environments, just as Muhammad acted by the norms of the very primitive culture that he came from and the very disgusting culture that he established. I am judging Muhammad because Muhammad is praised day and night by Muslims, because they want to imitate him and want everybody to respect him, because Muhammad is their religion. Muhammad is Islam. This is why we should now tear down the statues of Muhammad. Of course, we have no statues or pictures of Muhammad, but Muhammad is everywhere in Muslim buildings and homes, books and art, prayers and phrases, on the mind of every Muslim. Maybe it's time to tear down Muhammad right there, to stop using his name, to destroy this barbaric character. If there is a statue to be torn down, this is it. Please just throw him out. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, it's very important for me that you like and share it and subscribe for more. Most of my videos are not monetized, so you won't see any ads. If you want to support me and my cause, you can support me on Patreon or on apostateprophet.com. I appreciate your support very much. I will be back. For now, have a great day and stay away from Islam.